again, I
All
think
right, just want to pause here.
And about
we
what.
have
I mean, it's
we
not
have
like
another
a
guest
catch-all
that
for
I would.
everything.
We have another guest that I would like to add. This is Mr. Matt Binder. Thank you so much.
Binder. It's Binder.
Binder. Sorry, Binder. Thank you for joining us. He is host of the podcast Doomed and Scam Economy, contributor at the Majority Report with Sam Cedar. So thank you for joining us. We are discussing how everything Democrats do is socialism.
No, I wish.
I was trying to refute that, by the way. So
good work.
Oh, hey, I see Michael Tracey's here. Hey, Michael.
Hey, what's up?
He tried. I'll give him that.
Can I make a quick point on what Robby was saying now? So when I was first addressing your thesis, the crux of the argument, at least as I heard it, and as you expressed it, was to do with the healthcare programs of various societies as an entry point to full-blown communist China-style authoritarian communism, right? I mean, that's what you first articulated. Then you said the crux of the argument was different. It had to do with COVID policy. It had to do with gender transition.
Robby, to be fair, Robby did say the direction. So I think when you say the direction, it's not just one thing.
Hold on.
I never got to finish what I was saying, so I didn't change it. You interrupted me, so I never got to get to the whole story on what was going on until you stopped talking. But
okay. I mean, so should we sit and let you do a 45-minute lecture before we can respond to any aspect of the thesis? I mean, I don't know. Is this a panel type discussion? Anyway, so I was personally critical throughout COVID of the civil liberties infringements having to do with various enforcement mechanisms that were imposed in terms of stay-at-home orders and what have you, but especially the coercive policies around vaccination. You can go look at my Substack.
No, I've seen it.
Back in the day. Hold on, I was just going to say.
I appreciate that you did that.
I was just going to say that yes, this idea that it's somehow that those policies were somehow synonymous with the beating heart of the Democratic Party, I think is a bit of a misportrayal. I mean, let's not forget, and I'm not just doing
are you the majority?
A cheap what about
you
Trump
the minority
thing.
Of Democrats?
I'm not doing a cheap what about Trump thing, but given that Brian Kemp is up for re-election right now, probably going to win against Stacey Abrams, it's worth recalling, it's even amusing to recall, that Donald Trump publicly hectored Brian Kemp in the spring of 2020 for, according to Trump, prematurely reopening Georgia, right? So for removing the lockdown too quickly. And, plenty of Republican governors, virtually all of them actually, in 2020, instituted some variation of a lockdown or a stay-at-home order or some other sort of unprecedented measure that was related to COVID. Obviously, the severity of it varied by state, but this idea that it was somehow the exclusive province of the Democratic Party and therefore reflected their fundamental ideological proclivities and the direction that they're taking as a coalition just doesn't really hold water. I mean, so I think, if you want to just ascribe every COVID policy related excess to the Democratic Party and therefore make some kind of wild extrapolation to Xi Jinping, you can do that, but I think you're going to find that there's a whole lot of countervailing evidence that kind of complicates.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Okay, this should be
even Ron DeSantis, this anti-lockdown champion, he shut down the Florida school system for at least.
This is a very very simple question. Okay, so I want to agree on the facts first. Okay, so do you agree that in China they were welding doors shut during COVID and having people inside their homes with the door welded shut? Do you remember this?
I remember that.
I recall seeing videos of that. I don't recall any analog to that in the United States, unless I missed something.
So I'm just let's pretend that this happened during COVID for that reason. My question to you would be: in the United States of America, would you see it as more likely that would occur in a place like California under Gavin Newsom, or more likely it occurs in Florida under Ron DeSantis?
It wouldn't
occur at all. What's with the hypothetical? What's with the hypothetical? That's such a bizarre.
I can agree that there's no need to use hypotheticals because we actually have real world examples, and you are more than welcome to criticize certain Republican governors for Greg Abbott. They also had a mask mandate in Texas. That was the thing. Yeah, that was the thing that happened.
So
Trump,
why doesn't that reflect
he was
the Republican Party?
hang on. I'm not. So Trump absolutely engaged in certain lockdown things, right? I mean, barring flights from China, closing the border with Canada, these were lockdown measures that Donald Trump himself undertook. So yeah, absolutely, there were Republicans who also jumped on board that wagon. But let's look at currently, all right? There are actually places under Republican governors that are saying, no, we will not have vax mandates. Your employment status will not be dependent on your vaccine status. Conversely, do we see Democrats doing the same thing? We saw places that were implementing vaccine passports citywide, right? But by fiat, not just individual businesses. Was that happening in places that were Democrat run or Republican run? So I get what you're saying, Michael. It's not just, oh, one side was for freedom, one side wasn't. But I think you're being a little bit naive if you don't acknowledge that absolutely there was a string of authoritarianism that went further with the Democrats.
Are there any? Only real quick. Are there any places in the United States that are still doing
the way that he's
No, there's not. No,
Okay.
Destiny, I know exactly what you're going to say.
Wait. This is really important, Lauren, because you used a really bad word there, really evil word, authoritarian. It seems like there is democratic pressure here because it seemed like that a lot of those vaccine passports became pretty unpopular, and I'm pretty sure I don't think those exist anywhere in the United States right now.
No,
I mean, they don't exist in New York City, and I know that's the big evil for Republicans.
Sure. So
that hasn't been the case for over almost a year, if not more.
Well, there was an authoritarian streak in how those vaccine passport initiatives were implemented. They were the mayors of places like St. Paul, Boston, Washington D.C. They imposed those vaccine passport initiatives or schema by invoking their emergency powers. So they didn't have to have any deliberative process with the city council. The mayors just unilaterally decreed these policies. And of course, they were farcical in their practical implementation. So actually rather quickly were unwound. But yeah, I mean, I agree, Lauren, that in many cases, the Democratic elected officials are much more sort of freewheeling and capricious in how they wield state power, especially if they have some putative public health justification, which obviously COVID, gave them gift wrap. So yeah, I don't deny that at all. Again, I'm just objecting to this maximalist sort of theory that's being weaved by Robby to kind of.
I understand. I just sort of jumped in the stream here, but is this? Like, where did this conversation come from?
I don't know. I don't know.
This is like an election night stream, right? Yeah. And I can guarantee you COVID policy is not on anybody's mind, any voter's mind right now.
Yeah, we have another guest to add, actually. We want to welcome Long Day. Ben, thank you so much for joining us. He's a columnist for Jacobin Magazine, an adjunct philosophy professor at Morehouse College, and the author of several books, most recently Christopher Hitchens' What He Got Right, How He Went Wrong, and Why He Still Matters. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
I think the issue is that Robby started to describe the Democratic Party as being a majority socialist party, which is insane to me.
Reminiscent of China.
I just wanted to.
Robby, aren't you running for office somewhere? Or am I confusing you with somebody else? No. Okay.
I was just about socialist lines, and we were going to try to have a conversation.
I've actually got to run because I'm at Carrie Lake's party. I have to go speak for her event. So God bless her. Will hopefully be the governor of Arizona tonight.
Godspeed.
Thank you for joining us, Robby. It's been a pleasure.
I know you guys aren't happy about that, but
well, how do you know she's going to win if the elections there are rigged? If she wins, how can you trust that's the process?
I believe in her, but in terms of, I'll put it this way. It's very simple. When you see the problems in elections in America, you see these like weird videos of them not having the papers and them not, being able to tabulate things and everything. Where does this happen? Almost universally. I'm sure there's anecdotal ones that are not, but almost universally, Democrat cities, Democrat states. Almost
Can I ask one question?
Arizona is a Democrat city, Democrat
wait. Hold on.
state.
One quick question. Does it ever give you pause that these videos are so much more compelling when they're clipped up and cut up and thrown on YouTube, and they seem to lose all of their veracity when they're actually put in front of a judge that has to evaluate what happened start to finish? Didn't we see multiple times like there was the famous video of the ballot box that got pulled out from underneath the table, and that clip made its way around YouTube 7,550 million times, and then when a judge looked at it, they were like, oh, well, there's video footage before where they just slid the ballot box before, like 3 hours earlier.
Did you say judges don't want to get involved with elections?
I couldn't hear you, Matt.
Did you just say judges don't want to get involved with elections?
They don't want to get involved in changing the results of elections. I mean, look at the historical precedent for it or what has happened. It's never been a super exciting thing judges want to get in the middle of. They kind of want to allow the process to work and adjudicate itself. they'll get involved if something very, 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 very obvious.
Hold on. I'm very young, but like, wasn't there like a presidential race in the year 2000 where the highest court of the land decided the outcome of that election?
Yes. And was that a popular move on their part to get involved in it? How did people react to it? How did the media
Obviously,
react?
there's going to be a lot of tensions on both sides, but the idea that the judiciary is not going to be involved in cases brought before the judiciary, that's an astounding claim to me. Like, are you saying
But they absolutely have the ability to dismiss the case. And I think a lot of people would argue that dismissing the case would be the right thing to do if you had confidence in the vote.
But judges have not been involved today on micro issues in states like Pennsylvania and in Arizona. And in where did they extend the vote at?
Hold on. Can I just correct the record? Because I'm the one who recounted this anecdote because I happen to be right now in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. I'm outside a election night party for this Republican candidate, Jim Bogdat, who's running for Congress, likely to win, I would say at this point.
Oh, Michael!
And this is a Republican-heavy area. This is a Republican-heavy area where it's like, it's mixed, but there are pockets of.
Michael, say the point. Say what you want to say.
I'm saying the point. The point is that the places where there was a so-called paper shortage that forced the local judge to extend the voting hours in this county by 2 hours to 10 p.m., those are a lot of Republican-leaning areas. So the anecdote that I relayed earlier that you cited as evidence that it's only Democrats, that's contradicted by the firsthand evidence that I'm recounting to you right now based on what I'm hearing at this very election night party for a Republican candidate.
Who's responsible in that area? And I did say there are anecdotal cases that are not, but in that area, who's responsible for making sure the papers are there? Who's the Secretary of State? Are they a Democrat? Yes, in Pennsylvania. Who's the governor? Also a Democrat. Who's responsible overall for overseeing these elections? What has been done to ensure that all of the different counties have what they need to be able to run the elections effectively, and ultimately who's responsible for that? And I would say the Secretary of State. And if things go wrong in their state, that's on them. Same thing again here in Arizona. The Secretary of State is a Democrat, and in Maricopa County, they do have a lot of Democratic.
But the election rules are determined by the state, who's in control of the state parties, and in both of those states, I'm pretty sure Republicans control both the state house and the assembly or whatever. So
the individual official is not necessarily a Republican.
Doesn't mean that you're enforcing them.
Right.
Also, wasn't there a house? Wasn't there a house race?
Hold on. For individual elections ran at these places, I doubt that these election officials are walking into every single individual place. Wouldn't it be probably the responsibility of the people running those centers to make sure they've got the supplies needed on election day?
Hey, Robby, wasn't there a house race in North Carolina in 2018 that was judicially negated because the Republican candidate, this is for the House of Representatives, was found to have committed mass election fraud? Or am I imagining that?
But like I said, they will get involved if it is very explicitly criminally obvious.
And that was a Republican anecdote, right?
It was 100%. That one was 100%, and it was him buying votes, correct? Wasn't it? He was essentially buying votes.
It was like paid ballot harvesting, some kind of activity like that.
And it was Republicans who reported on him and got him, ultimately brought to justice.
But just to get back to my original question, though, Robby, how are you going to know Kari Lake wins for sure tonight? When the results come in and if she's on top, how are you going to be sure that it wasn't rigged?
Because Katie Hobbs, her opponent that she's running against, is Secretary of State. So unless you believe in a conspiracy where the Democratic candidate to be governor in this state, who is also the Secretary of State, is rigging the election.
Didn't you guys believe that very thing in Georgia for Trump?
No.
Yes. Didn't they have a Republican Secretary of State?
Okay, so
what's the difference? Go ahead. What's the difference, my friend?
Raffensperger hates Trump, is an anti-Trump establishment.
Oh, okay.
So this would be akin to, listen, would you be able to believe that somebody like Nancy Pelosi wants AOC out of the party?
Would you be able to believe that the Democrats would screw Bernie out of the nomination because they're all Democrats?
You believe the Democrats would
screwing Bernie out of the nomination is with superdelegates or with feeding questions via a CNN panel is 70 trillion leagues removed from rigging.
I am a huge Bernie supporter, and the idea that the election was rigged against him in terms of votes.
In theory,
what was that?
What people believed in Georgia was that, number one, the areas under Democrat control, that those were the problem areas where we had votes coming in at 3 a.m. Do you guys remember the broken water pipe that never existed? Okay, they had to stop counting because of a broken water pipe that was never broken. Do you remember this
crazy
story?
Republican fairy tales?
I was.
No,
I mean,
look,
the weird thing is, I was
they covered this in even Democrat media.
In 2020, I was in Atlanta at the Atlanta Hawks Stadium, State Farm Arena, where those votes were being counted. And I was being told by people on Twitter and wherever else that I was hallucinating when I informed them that I, just as a journalist or even any citizen can do this, was able to walk in and observe physically with my own two eyes the ballots being counted. Like there was the whole misperception about how that entire process unfolded. Do I doubt that Fulton County, Georgia, is not entirely flawless in its ability to count votes? No, I don't. And there's plenty of reason to believe that there could be improprieties or malfeasance, around the margins.
Exactly.
But this idea that it's this holistic, even like semi.
I'm not saying every election
thing.
I never said that.
It's really caused a lot of Republican voters who are otherwise, decent
I agree with you,
people
Michael.
to be kind of self-deluded as to how election administration actually works in the United States. And I kind of resent that just as a civic-minded individual.
I think we've turned voters off in many cases to not trusting voting out to the degree they don't want to vote, because some people have gone really far with this stuff and they haven't even themselves been fully informed on how it all works.
Well, hold on. When you say some people and haven't been fully informed, you're talking about President Donald Trump, who absolutely should be fully informed, right? It's not just random people on Twitter. It's the ex-president of the United States
that has pushed people to not vote specifically. And this goes
like
wider
Donald
than
Trump undermining mail-in ballots 10 months before even the election, before the 2020 election. You don't think that might have discouraged some Republicans from voting?
Hang on, guys. Speaking of voting, election stuff, I just want to let you know,
Donald
Beto
Trump is
O'Rourke
coming on?
has lost, unfortunately.
Yes.
Oh
no.
Third time's not the
that
charm.
was expected. That was
Yeah,
expected.
third time's not the charm. Who has?
Texas now?
Sorry.
What's up?
Can he move out of Texas, please? Go to California, New York, somewhere where he's wanted.
Hey,
No,
Lauren,
he's heading straight for MSNBC. We also have
Yes.
Paul Gosar in Arizona has won re-election. So
Right.
Awesome.
These are all
Paul
expected races, right?
Paul Gosar, at my urging, issued a public invitation to Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky to come to Phoenix for peace talk negotiations that could be hosted, I guess, I don't know, at some scenic resort in the area. Hey, I just wanted to put
And you're urging.
I actually wanted to put a question to Ben, because I'm always curious for his take on things, about this whole idea of election denialism. Like, this term election denier is now in popular currency, where every Republican who raises any concern or doubt about anything to do with the manner in which votes are counted or tabulated, or the way in which ballots are received, they're all election deniers now, and therefore this cataclysmic threat to democracy, and therefore planning some insurrection 2.0 or domestic terrorism or whatever. That's the grand theory that Democrats seem to be going with. So I'm just wondering if you think that it would be reasonable to postulate that post 2016 there was another species of quote unquote election denialism that was incredibly rampant among Democrats. I mean, I can quote you, I can cite to you in about 2 seconds the polling data which showed that a supermajority, so 67+% of Democratic voters post 2016 election, as far as late as 2018-19, believed not just that the election was unfairly won by Donald Trump in some vague sense, but that Russia actually hacked the voting machines themselves and fraudulently installed Trump into power. Now, that seems like a potential delegitimization, quote unquote, of the election, but I don't remember people screaming like a chicken with their head chopped off that was this profound threat to democracy, and showed how insidious and destructive election denialism was, and tore at the fabric of our democracy. And I'm just wondering why not, and why this Republican version, which does obviously exist in some fashion, is just presumptively this major threat, where the Democratic variation, which also plainly exists, is just something that we're supposed to memory hole.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are obviously versions of Russiagate stuff that were ridiculous and people said silly things. I would never deny that. But I also think there are some pretty big disanalogies between the two cases. One of them is when you look at attempts to actually overturn the result of the election, which I think is the biggest deal. You certainly had some people, liberal celebrities, who were doing this like pretty peripheral stuff with the Hamilton electors or whatever to try to do that. But they, you didn't really get like, Hillary Clinton engaged in months and months of attempts to overturn the result of the election and to try to get it to be not certified and et cetera. So, I mean, I think that even if you have like, I mean, I was never a Russiagate guy. I always thought that was like severely overstated, but like, I still think that like one of these things is on the face of it a lot worse than the other, certainly in terms of like the caliber of the people. I mean, the sitting president of the United States was very openly trying very hard to get the result of the election overturned. There wasn't really anything equivalent like what you're talking.
Wait, Ben, you mean funding Jill Stein for a recount wasn't the election the election fraud conspiracy that Trump put forward?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, I think what Mike is describing is mostly a media phenomenon. That's the distinction.
It wasn't solely a media phenomenon, though. And yeah, I grant, of course. I grant, of course.
But the real question is, what did Dems do after, and then what did Republicans do after? And I think the gap there is as wide as can be. Dems eventually went no further than continuing to question it.
Well, they were talking about questioning. There were congressional investigations, to be clear, but absolutely there were actual.
There was
Republican
no congressional
audits.
Investigations to whether Trump won the election.
Wait, hold on, Matt, real quick. Matt, your microphone. It sounds like you're having a sampling error right now. I don't know if it's
what's going on?
Something.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh,
I thought that might have been just me, but
Hold
yeah, I
on.
heard it too.
Go.
Yeah. I mean, Ben, I agree that obviously there are disanalogies between what the Republicans did post 2020 and what Democrats did post 2016. I'm not saying that they're equivalent or even that they're equally grave in their offensiveness. I'm simply noting that Republicans are kind of frivolously labeled or capriciously labeled, quote, election deniers, even if they rhetorically voice doubts as to the veracity of election results. So forget what Donald Trump even himself did, or forget like the more concrete actions that were taken. Even like a Republican congressional candidate or something who said, gee whiz, maybe the Pennsylvania mail-in balloting system was not entirely flawless, or maybe there were some issues in Fulton County, Georgia, or whatever. Even if they expressed just some kind of rhetorical doubts as to the legitimacy of the vote, they're called election deniers. Whereas you have people like John Lewis. John Lewis, who's like not just a media guy, right? John Lewis is this titanic figure in the lore of the Democratic Party. He went on Meet the Press ahead of Trump's inauguration in 2017, said he was boycotting it on the ground that Trump was illegitimately elected because Russia stole the election for him. That's what John Lewis said, and I can give you countless other examples of not just
what did John Lewis actually
but major elected officials. So why is their rhetorical posture
sought
to undermine the legitimacy of the 2016 election? Why doesn't that get them labeled election deniers?
What did John Lewis actually do, though?
He vocally expressed his belief that Trump had been illegitimately installed into office by the Kremlin, therefore undermining the legitimacy of the 2016 election, just as many Republicans express a similar attitude toward the 2020 election without actually taking any tangible action, and are nonetheless labeled election deniers and threats to democracy.
I mean, the real problem is the ones that took the action, though, and that's what people focus on. Is my mic fixed, by the way, everybody?
Yes.
Yeah,
okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean that seems like the thing. It seems like that the reason that election, that like this term that you're objecting to, I think is in circulation so much more right now that that Republicans weren't able to get similar amount of juice out of Democrats, like casting doubts on the legitimacy of the 2016 election, is that for the most part, like again, outside of like extremely peripheral things like the Hamilton electors non-event or whatever, like there were really no attempts, and certainly no attempts with like big important people, certainly anybody who's remotely as important as the sitting president of the United States, to actually take action to overturn it. So it's like, I think it makes sense that being associated with, fairly or unfairly, and look, maybe in some of these cases you could make a case that it's unfair. I don't know who specifically you're thinking of who's made comments as mild as the ones you're thinking of, but whether it's fair or not, yeah, being associated with a camp of people who did things to try to overturn the election, like ranging from months and months of lawsuits to actually
asking the vice president of the United States not to certify the election.
Exactly, right.
Making phone calls to elected representatives to try to get them to find votes.
Right, etc. Right. I mean, like that just is going to be a bigger deal, I think.
So I do want to stop us here because
no matter what you think about Russiagate, and like even if you think that was, even if you're sympathetic to the left-wing critique of like, of the excesses of Russia, of like Russiagate paranoia and all that stuff, that still does seem pretty different to me.
So Adam Schiff and Ted Lieu
hang
and
on,
Sheldon
guys.
Whitehouse saying over
I do
want
to read a hyper chat that we've gotten. This is directed to Destiny, but I would love to hear your take on it just as a whole. Quick question. Do you believe that the housing market on the West Coast in both Canada and the US isn't too expensive because of Chinese immigration or investment? So there's a specific question. What do you guys think?
No, I don't think so. I think that right now the housing market issues we're having in the United States is we have a really difficult time building a lot of housing. You've got cities that are very dense. There's a lot of people trying to move into a limited number of houses.
Right, but why are there so many? Why are the cities so dense? I mean, I can't speak to the United States.
The cities are dense because in the United States, our housing policy is actual fucking unironic dog shit. And if you travel to literally any other country on the planet, you can see that they do mixed use zoning so much better than the United States. But we have endless suburbs that sprawl everywhere. We have no public transportation. We have no will to actually change any of the types of density that we have in any of our major cities in the United States. So housing prices are going to go up and up and up and up and up. And the people that live there, that are the strongest voters, are people that live in houses that are incentivized to vote for the shittiest housing policy possible. Like it'll never change without like actual authoritarian action.
I'll say to add to that, I do think that, in New York City, at least there are housing issues based on the fact that, very wealthy people from the United States and outside the United States come in and buy up property and buy up mass amounts of property. And you have a whole bunch of people now buying up apartment buildings for the purpose of Airbnb and things like that. And that definitely adds to these sorts of issues without a doubt. Again, the problem, though, isn't that they're from China or Russia or wherever. The problem is that they're very wealthy and they use their money to buy up all this property and land and then become little feudal lords over the land that they purchase.
Yeah, but I mean, even if they weren't doing it, that just shows that there's a lack of an ability to build hotels. Like there's a demand for this type of housing to exist in these places. People want to be able to rent places here. People want to be able to have hotels here, and they just can't.
I think there's also, I'll agree with that. I do think that's part of it, but I also think that the allure of Airbnb is, oh man, you get to open up a hotel, yet not have to deal with any of the, regulation that comes with opening an actual hotel.
Yeah, but I mean, like, how much is? But I mean, like, the fact of the matter is that like there's a market for it because they don't have hotels already in this area, right? Like, yeah, I don't know how else to get around that. Like, we need more hotels in areas, but we can't build anything. Like, if it's not going to be these people, if it's not going to be Airbnb, it's going to be people that just like rent rooms anyways, and I guess they'll do it off market as well. But
yeah, I think we agree. We're just focusing on two different areas. I don't think we're necessarily disagreeing here.
Sure. What happens to happen is you need to bulldoze the fucking suburbs and you need to start putting high rises up fucking everywhere. And these weird restrictions in cities where you can only have 5-story fucking apartments while the rent is $4,500 a month on a 2-bedroom shit apartment. And across the street, there are these dilapidated houses that are going for $950,000 a pop because we can't actually build high density housing anywhere. Is fucking insane in the United States.
Well, I agree with all your criticisms about zoning. It is ridiculous. I've tried to talk to Sean, actual Justice Warrior, about how things work in New York and places like San Francisco, and it just makes my head explode. But considering that, I mean, in a lot of places, population would be on the decline if it were just people who are actually born here. Don't you think that immigration plays at least some part in it? Admitting, of course, that it's a bigger story than just that one issue.
It just doesn't make sense to say that like immigration is an issue. You want people to be able to sort themselves out economically. If they have the opportunity to work in an area, you want them to be able to move to that area to work. Like whether we have immigration or not, there are people that are going to want to move. I mean, like I come from the Midwest. I live in Omaha, Nebraska for 30 years. Everybody's dream in a lot of these places is to move to one of the coastal cities and get a job in like one of these big places. But I mean, immigration or not, there's still always going to be massive upward pressures on rents as long as there are limited places for people to buy.
No, and you're absolutely right. And that's why when something like property is not the same as other goods and services that where you can just make more of it. You can't make more land easily. You can change zoning laws, but ultimately it's a finite space. But I think when it comes to the issue of like Chinese investment, there's another problem there, and not that just there are people moving into these cities. There are people moving into these cities who have a lot more capital than the locals. So actually, people can be priced out. It's almost like places like Vancouver are in a way being somewhat gentrified by the Chinese.
Yeah, but why are they priced out though?
You keep talking though too about immigrants as if they come in and all the immigrants, everyone immigrating here from the U.S. has tons of money. I mean, I live in the most diverse county in all of the country. I live in Queens, New York, majority immigrants, and let me tell you, we're all in the same boat. We're all working class. We're all making below 70, 50, 60, $50,000 a year. They're all in the same boat as you and me who were born here. I mean, that's not the problem.
Absolutely. Not every immigrant is some wealthy tycoon or something, but the question specifically was asking about the West Coast. And I know from a Canadian perspective, it absolutely is Chinese immigrant. And I'm Chinese, so I know a lot of people firsthand who are doing this. Not that anecdotes matter for much, but there are people who are being priced out of the housing market because, there are working class people who simply can't compete when wealthy foreigners come in and buy up their land. That's why there are in Canada, there's being suggested actual restrictions on who can and cannot buy property.
So do you want to restrict like wealthy people being able to immigrate to the country? Is that the goal?
No, that's not my plan. That's why
I'm asking what because it seems like that's what you're saying is like that. Like we should make so no wealthy people, no rich people can immigrate to the country. I feel like
I think there should be rules around buying up property, though. I think there should be taxes, very high taxes on people who buy a property and do not live in them.
Yeah, they already tried vacancy taxes in Vancouver, and it brought like triple-digit units back on the market. I don't think it was very effective. The idea that like all of these properties are being bought up and nobody's living in them, I don't think that is true. Like I think they've tried putting these types of vacancy tax in a lot of cities, and it doesn't usually help much. The reality is that a lot of people want to move, and there are very few units to move into.
Yeah, so there are two issues, right? There's the overall supply of housing, and like then there's the wealthy Chinese immigrants buying up property they're not living in. And to the extent that the second thing is a big problem, maybe Destiny is right, maybe it's not a big problem, but to the extent that it's a big problem, it's surely just as much of a problem if it's wealthy people buying vacant property who aren't Chinese immigrants, right? Like that part doesn't really seem like it matters. The question is like, who has the money to do that? And if you think that something like vacancy tax would make sense, it should be on anybody doing that. I mean, it's not obvious to me why that should matter, whether they come from China or not.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Hey, can I make a quick point that's actually related to the midterms that draws on what we were talking about earlier?
You want to talk about the midterms on the midterm stream?
Whatever.
Let's talk
Boring.
So there's this Republican candidate for the House of Representatives in New Hampshire. Her name is Caroline Leavitt. She was a press aide in the Trump White House. She did not participate in January 6th, but she has made comments about how she believes Trump won the 2020 election, right? So she didn't take any tangible action to like effectuate Trump's ability to retain power. She just rhetorically lent credence to the idea that Trump had won the election and Biden had not been legitimately elected, right? So she, of course, is labeled an election denier. That's the term of art now. She gets called an election denier and therefore is portrayed as this grievous threat to democracy. And the reason why I bring up the parallel to post-2016 is because you have people like Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Adam Schiff, Elizabeth Warren, even the upper echelons of the Democratic Party. I found the quotes recently. They all said some variation of Russia hacked the election in 2016, right? So how is that not casting doubt on the legitimacy of the 2016 election in a way that is at least approximately analogous to what people like Caroline Leavitt are doing when they say, because of problems with mail-in voting related to COVID, Trump actually is the rightful winner, right? So why don't we therefore retroactively castigate these icons of the Democratic Party as quote-unquote election deniers and threats to democracy because they were about that outcome?
Yeah, there's a huge difference, okay? Number one, I think it is fair to criticize Democrats that are it's fair to criticize Democrats that said things like that. So when Hillary Clinton said that he was an illegitimate president, I think it was either Obama or Biden might have said something. It's fair to criticize those people for doing those things. That's fine. But the level of election denialism that Trump has engaged in is on another level, right? The phone calls to Georgia, all of the lawsuits throughout the entirety of the United States, the challenges.
I wasn't talking about Trump. I was talking about a Republican candidate for Congress.
No, I understand, but I'm saying like it
Sure,
matters who it comes from.
This
right?
is what I was saying earlier, Mike. That I think that like, look, it's, you know, you want to say a lot of these like claims that were made about Russia after 2016 were ridiculous. I agree with you. I've always agreed with that. I mean, you can go back and look at the social media receipts going back years. I think a lot of that stuff was centrist Democrat cope for the fact that Hillary Clinton ran a shitty campaign and lost an election that she should have easily won. But
Bernie Sanders indulged in it too, so it wasn't centrist.
Okay, but I mean, like, I don't think that it existed. I don't think the primary driver of it, right, was not a primary driver, but he did indulge in it. Sure, yes, that's true. So they have but like the question. So look, as far as that goes, I'm with you. But I think if the question is why is election denialism treated as a bigger deal this time, or is perceived to be a bigger threat to the ability of the democratic process to go on, public confidence in it, all that stuff. It's because some, not all, but some of the people in this camp that you're describing actually took these massive concrete actions to try to overturn the will of the voters. So, of course, being associated with the people who, throwing in your lot, even rhetorically, with the people who are taking those actions is going to be a bigger deal than just being part of a camp that did nothing but just talk.
Okay, question for all of you guys, though. Do you think that requesting an audit is in and of itself an attempt to overthrow the will of the voters? An audit or investigation?
Oh, no, but that wasn't the only thing that happened. It was like
part
of like
absolutely,
a huge bag of tricks.
That wasn't the only thing that happened.
If that was the only thing that would happen, I don't think we'd be having this conversation.
Yeah. Also, the thing that Michael keeps bringing up, though, just seems to be like one party's base's opinion over and over again. Like, what happened to any of these politicians? Nothing. Because you're just like, you're focusing on like Dems called these people an election denier and Republicans called those people an election denier. Why is it okay? I mean, okay to who? Okay to who?
A lot of these people that you're saying have been labeled as election deniers are going to win their elections, right?
Right. Marjorie Taylor Greene just won in Georgia. What's her punishment?
Sort of grave consequences for this. It's just like somebody said something mean about them, and in some cases it's inconsistent. I might even agree that in some cases it's inconsistent, but I also think it's reasonable to treat election denialism in a context where everything that Stephen was listing off earlier happened as a bigger deal than people mostly making statements and doing investigations, not actually taking concrete efforts to overturn the 2016 election.
So, little update for Georgia. Herschel Walker has taken the lead by 1,800 votes.
Oh, but Ben, I think you're missing the forest for the trees, or maybe that's the wrong metaphor. If you say that it was just a bunch of loose talk from some pundits and even some politicians related to the 2016 election, there was a concerted, coordinated effort within the national security apparatus that was aligned with factions of the Democratic Party in the 2016 election, then even into Trump's presidency in 2017, whereby unprecedented action was taken to thwart Trump as a candidate and then as a president on the basis of widespread belief.
Wait. That's not true. The unprecedented, hold on. There was an unprecedented action.
Illicitly in some sort of collusive arrangement with Putin, and therefore was a national security
threat.
Why not talk about the unprecedented? Why not talk about denialism that was prevalent?
Why not talk
back
about
then? That actually did result in extremely tangible and consequential action that was, in a real sense, designed to thwart the Democratic will. I mean, there was even contemplation for a time.
No, okay.
Because Trump was supposedly
what about Comey?
In a conspiracy
What about Comey?
With Putin,
what about
that
Comey?
he was going to be ousted from office under the 25th Amendment.
All right, I don't think we're going to get any further on this subject. So you've just mentioned Putin. How do we all feel about Russia? Okay, let's talk about that. All right,
Great.
A lot of people are frustrated that we are sending more money to Ukraine when there are so many problems in the United States. Others feel that, hey, we have to support Ukraine because we have to defend democracy abroad, and if we don't fight Russia over there, we fight them over here.
It's a pointless sort of comparison, because it's not like, oh, we have that Ukraine money now, we're going to now put it towards things people want. No, this money is going to be earmarked for some other overseas expenditure. I mean, it literally does not matter. Like the idea that we're not taking care of our veterans or helping the homeless because this money's going to Ukraine, that money's not going to go to anywhere like that. That money is earmarked for Ukraine. If it didn't go to Ukraine, it'd be going to some other country.
Corruption. Like, that's just government corruption. Earmarking for other stuff doesn't mean it's okay to just throw it over to Ukraine. And honestly, the fact that Biden had such an interest in Ukraine canceling the investigation of Viktor Shokin or whatever it was he was talking about, caught on camera. Well, son of a bitch, he got fired.
That was all the European Union. Every single person in Europe wanted that prosecutor gone. That wasn't just Biden.
Okay. He offered to withhold American aid for that. Was that part of the European Union?
He didn't offer to withhold American aid for it. There was a conversation about it, but the entire European Union wanted him gone. He was not unilaterally making that decision.
Well, I think that the thing that Lydia is trying to point out is that Biden, specifically, not the European Union, was the one that mentioned withholding aid.
Because he was the ambassador, I think, that was taking point on that negotiation, but it wasn't a unilateral thing done by the vice president of the United States.
Right, but
he sat in a room and said, if you don't fire this man, we're going to withhold X amount of aid from you as the vice president of the USA. To me, that's quid pro quo. And I'm shocked that other people don't see it.
Quid pro quo for what? Wait, hold on. Actually, before you answer that, did Trump try to do a quid pro quo or no?
No.
Okay.
How not? No, shut up. Let her answer that. Hold on. How not? I really want to.
Absolutely not.
Okay,
he asked a question about Viktor Shokin.
Trump asked a question to
He's like, what's going on here?
That was it?
You have the transcript in front of you?
What were the questions?
You can look it up.
Yeah, what was the
I
question?
honestly don't remember any of this off the
He just
top of my
wanted to-
head.
he
We're
was just-
so
he was just
far
asking
gone
for,
from
like-
where we're supposed to, what we should be talking about tonight.
Yeah, okay,
but go ahead.
let's
The
that.
fantasy world of like the
Ukraine right
conservative
now.
establishment is unfucking believable. Like it's actually like the most destructive force in the country. Like I can't believe it.
Hold on, Matt. The way that you just framed the nature of Ukraine war appropriations is really not accurate. I mean, Congress has taken out of the U.S. Treasury upwards of, I think it's around 70 to 80 billion dollars at this point. And that money coming out of the Treasury is fungible, right? So it's not as though it would automatically be used for some other foreign boondoggle. It's just money that Congress is choosing on its own initiative to appropriate for this particular purpose. So in theory, they could appropriate it for, I don't know, some other domestic need like housing or healthcare or whatever. I'm not saying they would, but they could, right? It's not like it's earmarked
the Congress
only for military intervention, right? And so it's just amazing to me that people kind of dismiss the significance of the nature of this U.S. financial and military commitment to Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine has received more, quote, U.S. financial and military commitment to Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine has received more, quote, I don't know what the current stats are, but Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell are not going to cut off aid. The Democrats and certain Republicans are going to use that as an excuse to push through this gigantic package, in the cover of night, tied in with all kinds of other budgetary items to, keep the spigot flowing for, another couple months.
I mean, we'll just have to disagree there. I mean, we've seen that when the government wants to. I mean, Trump was happy to have, 1.5 trillion printed up specifically to dump into the stock market. The money is there whenever we want it, and we choose not to do these things whenever we want.
I think there's a difference between saying the money is there versus the government is willing to print the money. Because to be clear, the money is absolutely not there. It's not there when Trump wants to do it. It's not there when the Democrats want to do it. The issue is that each party is willing to print and spend recklessly when it suits them, and neither is fiscally responsible. Although it seems like when it comes to Ukraine, both the Democrats and Republicans are more than happy to just money print or go.
I mean, we could do that. We're literally the world currency. I mean, we can literally do that.
But
there's
consequences to do that.
The most money given to any country for so-called military aid since South Vietnam in the 1960s, just kind of neither here nor there, like not too big of a deal, hardly even worth commenting on.
It's honestly not at the top of my list of the things that matter. And judging by what we know about the voters tonight, they don't really give a shit about it either.
Also, wait, how much money did we give?
How do you decide that? I don't really get it.
There's you could literally look at every single news outlet, right and left and middle, whatever you want to call a news outlet, from Fox News to CNN to MSNBC. Every exit poll, Ukraine doesn't come up on any of them.
Well, they don't even list it on exit polls much of the time. So, I mean, is it even an option for people to select?
Foreign spending in general,
would be the number one issue, or other economic stuff. But, I think people are aware, actually, that there is this seemingly limitless U.S. military commitment to Ukraine that's fueling warfare against the country with the world's largest nuclear arsenal, and led to Joe Biden himself warning that the world faces the greatest threat of nuclear annihilation since the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'm actually curious what Ben thinks of.
Yeah, well, I think I was going to say, I think that last part is way more important than the first part about the actual spending, because one, I do think that it's very unlikely that even with the Congress we have right now, never mind the Congress we're going to have after tonight, that money is going to be spent on, that if like all funding to Ukraine stopped tomorrow, that like that money is going to be spent on, healthcare or anything like that, right? I think that, remember that the GOP has been saying, this is in Kevin McCarthy's Commitment to America document, that what they want to do is cut Social Security and Medicare and go after the NLRB, for anti-union purposes. And by the way, ratchet up tensions with China. So, like, I don't think that they're going to divert that money, even if they did stop it. And I agree with you, they're not going to stop it. But even if they did stop it, they're not going to divert that money to socially beneficial domestic purposes. But also, that money is, like a very small percentage of overall U.S. military spending. If you want to say we spend way too much on guns as opposed to butter, I definitely agree with that, right? But I mean, this is a very small percentage of it. My concern about Ukraine is much less about the amount of money than about the dangers of of heightened escalation between nuclear powers. I mean, that's terrifying. I think that there have been some reports recently that that claim that the Biden administration has been in talks with the Russian government. I hope that that's true. But yeah, I mean, I've been I'm beating that drum for a long time. I think I think that the Congressional Progressive Caucus letter was good. I think it's bad that it was withdrawn. I like the fact that Ro Khanna has stuck with it. So I mean, there probably is some agreement on that.
I mean, that letter was a joke to begin with. I mean, if you actually read the text, you would see that it was more or less just a reaffirmation.
You can't give him an inch, Ben. You can't give him an inch.
It was basically just an attempt to kiss Biden's ass, really, and make it seem like there was some reorientation toward an emphasis on diplomacy. But even what Ro Khanna says in his justification for why he has not abandoned the substance of the letter is because it actually doesn't depart from Biden's policy at all. And in fact, I think reaffirmation of it. And what Biden's policy is and has been since the outset is to more or less completely discard diplomacy. I mean, Zelensky, who the Biden says he's being referred to set the strategic parameters of the war, he says that there could be no further negotiations with Russia unless there's the ouster of Putin, so unless regime change is effectuated in Russia because of this limitless U.S. military backing, which you can poo-poo the amount of money, but it's enormous comparatively speaking to any other commitment the U.S. has made.
I think that you're contradicting yourself in the middle of that, Michael, because you started out by saying that there's nothing in the letter that means anything because they endorse what Biden has been doing, and what Biden has been doing has been anti-diplomacy. But the whole point of the letter was to say, in fact, we do need to move towards direct talks between the United States and Russia. And I actually think that's a very big deal. to start saying that after months and months of, as you well know, it being considered to be totally out of the question and off the table to even talk about diplomacy. I think I don't really see how you can have it both ways, that it's like really bad that diplomacy has been ruled out and that it's just completely meaningless that this letter advocated diplomacy.
Because Biden and Blinken and other administration officials, they've never formally ruled out diplomacy, right? That's just the practical impact of what's
so the fact that they've never formally ruled it out means that the fact that it's not talked about at all is not a big deal, and talking about it and saying it should happen is not a big deal.
Well, but even you can find speeches that Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, has given where he makes a variation of the point that was made in that Progressive Caucus letter, where in theory, it's expressed that they would like to have some sort of negotiated settlement at some point, but it almost doesn't matter because it's just
that's completely different.
Either way, it's moot because
the letter doesn't say that it would be good to have negotiation at some point. The letter says we need to have an immediate drive toward negotiation right now. Now is the time to do that. Like, those are really different. Like, now you could say that it doesn't matter very much because it wasn't going to happen or it wasn't a strong enough statement or whatever, but I don't see how you can say that those are the same thing.
Because basically what it did is verify that the signatories of that letter were going to continue to unwaveringly support the policy status quo, meaning that they were going to continue to support all war appropriations bills. They were never going to apply any conditions to continued funding of the war effort. They were not going to deviate or compel Biden to deviate whatsoever from the current trajectory of policy, other than politely urging him to maybe think about doing more diplomacy.
Chat,
and the
Chat
irony
is
is that once the letter was
Chat is asking that we refocus, guys. So something that I do want to ask, we have some progressives right here. Right now, a lot of Republicans will say that the culture war is on the ballot. And a lot of Republicans have really been driving hard that Democrats want to trans your kids. How do you respond to those charges and the fact that Republicans are trying to make this an election issue, specifically when it comes to suburban moms?
I would say that it's incredibly telling that they are obsessively trying to whip up their base about hormone blockers that on average over the course of the last 5 years have been prescribed to people under 18 for trans kids, less than 1,000 per year in the entire country of hundreds of millions of people. That they're trying to make that the center of the election, not say the fact that Kevin McCarthy says he wants to raise the minimum wage for the minimum age for Social Security and Medicare that every single person in the country is eventually going to get. I think it's pretty transparent why they would prefer to talk about the first thing than the second thing, but I don't see any reason anybody else should indulge that.
So you think it's just a non-issue? Because what people like Matt Walsh have uncovered is that even in places like Tennessee, Vanderbilt Hospital,
Matt Walsh is a really nice example about this, because very recently on Joe Rogan, he said that millions of kids were getting puberty blockers. He was actually fact check on air.
I don't think
that over the course of the last 5 years, it's been less than 5,000 total. So well over 1,000 a year on average in the whole country, a country of hundreds of millions of people. I think that wherever you come down on that, treating this as this vitally important crisis that like the whole election has to be about that, I think is pretty transparently silly. I think, given that there are much, much more important things at stake here that affect everybody, like the Social Security and Medicare examples, like, raising the minimum wage, which Republicans are all against, like, making it easier for people to organize unions, which Republicans are against. Like, those are things that affect everybody's lives in a really bread and butter way. And I think it would be much healthier to focus on that than trying to get in between, like, kids, parents, and doctors in this tiny, tiny, statistically vanishingly tiny number of cases.
So, Ben, is that the issue, or is it the school board thing where parents are feeling unheard by these school boards that want these actual weird books in front of their kids?
When you say books in front of their kids, in many cases, what we're talking about is books being in libraries, or even kids having access to regular public libraries. There's a teacher who's fired in Oklahoma for literally just helping kids to get, just telling them if you want to read books that are banned in the school library. Here's how you can get a public library card, and she was fired for that and relentlessly demonized by the Secretary of Education in Oklahoma. So I mean, I think that I think that this kind of level of book burning zeal to stop people from having any possibility that they can read books that social conservatives find objectionable is pretty rich, coming from people who 5 minutes ago claimed to be big free speech warriors. And two, I think that I think we really want to make a distinction there between we're putting it in front of you like this is assigned reading, and we're putting it in front of you like we're not going to stop you from checking it out at the library.
But would you agree that there is a difference between burning books and banning books, saying that this book is not appropriate for minors or for students?
So I think that saying that obsessively trying to take books off of shelves, where high school students, who can, by the way, very rightly, can get library cards at a regular public library, I think that that's a really censorious instinct, and I think it's very hard to justify the idea that there's some great crisis that justifies this. Really seems pretty thin to me. This really seems like reheated 1980s moral majority kind of stuff.
Ben, can I ask you?
Yeah, please.
I mean, do you think it's inaccurate to observe that there has been some discernible cultural trend in certain professions, namely, public school teachers or even private school teachers, where they have pretty noticeably sort of shifted their perspective on issues around gender and sexuality, and that has been potentially in some instances translated into actual changes in certain curricula in terms of how children are exposed to these issues at even a fairly young age?
Give me a concrete example.
I honestly don't have one off the top of my head. I mean, I'm not. I think it's fair to ask for an example. I don't have one. I mean, I haven't been focusing on this issue. But
there are examples of sex ed being taught younger and younger. Yeah.
Can we just stipulate there's an example somewhere of I don't know, a elementary school age class that's been taught about fluidity
TikTok
of gender
teachers.
Identification, right?
There's so many examples of teachers.
That has been happening.
All she does is post examples of teachers themselves saying that, I am non-binary. I try to bring the discussion of gender being fluid into my class.
Is X number of non-binary now because of me.
Right. I mean, this is something that is happening. And I think, it's fair to say, not millions of kids aren't going on hormone blockers, but I think if Democrats don't want to accept that parents are against this, and this is maybe happening more than they think, this being these issues brought to
I think
what Democrats what Democratic
parents are against this, I think, is a really misleading thing to say. This is the language I hear all the time. People who have kids, i.e. parents, are an incredibly politically and ideologically divided category.
I mean, they've done polls, at least in Florida. Most people do support sex ed being postponed to later grades instead of being brought.
Well, Florida sex ed was already postponed to later grades in Florida before the DeSantis bill ever came along. There's been stuff that's been on the books for decades in Florida saying, sex ed can't be taught in the earlier grades. When it is taught, it has to promote the benefits of monogamous heterosexual marriage. You can look at the PEN America statement about the DeSantis bill that quotes the language of that legislation. That was already on the books, and then even the law that came up had nothing about sex ed. Right? There's no terminology in the. I don't want to say don't say gay because I know people will object to that, to that description. But that bill, whatever you want to call it, there was nothing in there about sex ed. What it said was sexual orientation and identity. So it would not affect one way or the other when you can do sex ed. It would maybe affect whether you can, read people a book that has a gay character in it, but no sex. It could has affected many reports since it was passed. Things like gay teachers being able to put photos of their husbands out on the desk in front of them. So I think that claiming that it has something to do with sex ed, I think is just not accurate.
Well, I think it absolutely has to do with sex ed, because this is an example that comes from Michigan. So different state, but it's just at the top of my mind because I saw it earlier today. There are Muslim activists who are trying to form a coalition with Republicans. Historically, not good bedfellows, I'll admit, because these parents specifically were absolutely furious when they found out that in their student's library or in their child's library, there are actually books discussing what Grindr is, how gay sex works, and things like that. So there is an effort to bring to sex ed a discussion of
that's not sex ed. That's a book that's available in a library, and I also don't think it's very shocking that that's lots
religiously
of
conservative people,
that religious social conservatives of different religions feel similarly about this. That doesn't by itself, that fact, I don't really see why that would move the needle one way or the other.
Yeah,
because we're talking about the Muslim voting bloc, and I think this also applies to, we were talking earlier in the stream about how Hispanics are starting to go Republican in a lot of places. A lot of it has to do with crime. Sean is very good at talking about that, who just joined us. Thank you, by the way. But I think by ignoring this issue or trying to downplay it, you are telling a lot of parents who are experiencing this firsthand, who are looking at the kids, what their kids are learning firsthand, not liking it, by saying, oh, well, it's not that big a deal, like blah, blah, blah. You are essentially turning away those voters by saying that it's either not happening or it's not a big deal.
The Muslim voting bloc, though, was pretty conservative for many, many years. They were pretty stringent Republicans for a while, and then the war on terror happened and the Republican Party basically demonized them and they turned around. I mean, it's not that shocking that religiously, like Ben said, that religiously conservative people would agree with Republicans on some of these issues.
Just a quick point, and I wanted to agree with one of the first points that Ben raised about this, which is that it seems like a bit of a misallocated priority to litigate a national midterm election around this set of issues, because it's not even clear what role Congress would necessarily have in fashioning curricula having to do with gender identity and whatnot, right?
Well,
so,
actually, I mean, to bring up, I'm from Tennessee. Right now, the Tennessee state legislature is attempting, they're going to be putting forward a bill that would actually stop children being able to undergo medical transition when in regard to gender, things like puberty blockers.
Right.
And I know that's a different thing than what we're talking about specifically in regards to school curriculum. But I think a lot of people, when we're looking at a ballot and this issue is at the front of their mind, parents might be inspired to go to the polls specifically for this issue or vote straight R down the line because they just want something done about this.
Yeah, I mean, my point was going to be, even if you grant, as I do, and I think Ben does, that maybe there's a bit of an exaggerated emphasis on this issue, shouldn't you also grant, Ben, that there's been a fairly observable shift in attitudes among left liberal cultural milieus around issues of gender and identity? And of course, when a rapid shift like that occurs, it's probably going to manifest in terms of how, I don't know, certain subjects are taught in school or certain other areas of society that have some bearing on public policy. So I just think it's possible to simultaneously question the prioritization of this issue and the kind of transformation of it into the latest hot button culture war topic, while also acknowledging what seems to be reality, which is that there has been a very rapid shift in how these issues are discussed.
I certainly don't. Of course, there's been a rapid cultural shift in how trans people are perceived. There's certainly no doubt about that whatsoever.
And gender identity writ large.
Sure, all of that.
I'm sure these sort of things.
I'm sorry, Matt. You go.
No, I was just going to say, I'm sure these sort of things have happened in schools throughout history. I'm sure there was a massive cultural shift in the way classes were taught in schools after desegregation. I mean, these are things that happen as times change. I mean, so more.
The question to me would be, okay, grant that there's been, that the culture has moved, rapidly on all sorts of things related to this, which certainly has, right? I mean, whatever. Barack Obama was against gay marriage, and et cetera, et cetera. We all know how recently some of this has happened, but then like that's a separate question from should we approve of or say, oh, you don't want to lose the votes of people who are hyped up about this issue. Should you approve of what I think is often disturbingly censorious kind of moral authoritarianism on the right about this? And certainly, and I think the answer to that is no, even separately from the question of, is this a reasonable priority for a for a national election? Like, is 1,000 kids in the entire country getting puberty blockers more important than say the age at which every single American can get Social Security potentially being raised?
Could you imagine a reasonable objection raised that wasn't paired with any kind of moral censoriousness, maybe not even paired with any legislation that's about banning books or books from libraries, about relatively younger kids being taught notions of gender identity or whatnot that parents might reasonably infer is not age appropriate or confusing them or some other maybe deleterious outcome that's not like the full-blown right-wing moral paranoia, but maybe is like within the realm of reasonability.
Yeah, could I imagine somebody reasonably objecting to something going on in some school somewhere? Yeah, of course, absolutely, on all sorts of things all the time. But do I actually think that the evidence suggests the kind of moral crisis that's being stipulated in this attempt to whip up the Republican base into a culture war panic over this? Do I think that's remotely justified? Certainly not.
Right.
Well, I mean, we can talk about the merits of prioritizing this over something like Social Security. And I think for a lot of people who are voting Republican, it's not really an either or. They happen to agree with Republican principles, perhaps writ large, but this might be a better galvanizing factor than something less flashy than maybe Social Security. I don't want to downplay how big this issue, we're talking about school boards in general, public school system, how big of an issue this was and how big an issue it was for voters in Pennsylvania, right? We saw Virginia, with Glenn Youngkin's his election. So, I mean, when it comes to things like this, it's not just that Democrats are ignoring it, not vocally opposing it. We actually had someone who claims to be a girl, what's his name, Dylan Mulvaney. He was invited to Biden to speak with Biden. Where essentially the president has once more confirmed that he is for children transitioning medically. So, all of these things tie together, and it does happen at a national level as well. And I think a lot of parents, they're listening to this, and I think they would absolutely, regardless of their political affiliation, a lot of them would rather have to work 3 more years in order to retire than have their kids be exposed to that type of ideology.
I would love to see a poll on that specific question. My prediction for the record would be the opposite of yours.
I think you underestimate suburban moms. Frankly, I think you underestimate how passionate they are. CRT was a huge galvanizing factor. This gender issue is absolutely the same. And I think, it's kind of Democrats talking about raising the age that you're able to retire. It's kind of like Republicans whining about the national debt. Hey, it's going to happen anyway. And it's just not something that people are emotionally invested in. No, it's not sustainable to keep going at this.
Well, okay. First of all, none of that's true. They have I think I would recommend that anybody who thinks that that's true go look at the People's Policy Project and look at some of what Matt Brunig has written about this. The idea that there's some dramatic funding shortfall, the way that things are set up right now with Social Security, what people actually mean when they say it's going to go insolvent is that the way that the law is currently written, that you have if current Social Security tax rates can't fund it at the current level, eventually there's going to be automatically triggered cuts to that rate. But you could just as easily have the law be set so there'd be automatically triggered increases, or even just automatically triggered increases at the upper income level to the Social Security tax. The idea that's going bankrupt or whatever is Republican propaganda. Right. That's.
I mean, it's not just Social Security that's going bankrupt. Yeah. To be clear, the entire country is going bankrupt. It's enormous debt.
Yeah, the unfunded liabilities for Medicare and Medicaid are higher than Social Security, and to say that education doesn't have national implications is a little ridiculous. We have a federal Department of Education that allocates funding from the federal government with strings attached. I remember when Betsy DeVos was appointed as the education secretary, and everybody was lighting their hair on fire because they were like, "Oh my God, she's going to construct policy in such a way that will emphasize charter schools. So presumably you can do the same thing with gender ideology or anything that you want to teach on a national level.
So has this happened? Has this happened? Has there been federal from the Department of Education saying you must teach gender ideology?
Have they reinterpreted Title IX to make
Title
rules
IX.
for sports that involves transgenders competing against women? Yes. Like, so yeah,
I mean,
there are examples of them doing this.
You're talking about education. I thought we were talking about children here. I mean, here we go. We're talking about what is it? What is Title IX cover?
Title IX requires institutions that have federal funding related to education to keep an equal amount of spots for men and women. So it's supposed to be an anti-discrimination thing. There's other things in Title IX, but this is a sports implication of it. That is reinterpreted under the Biden administration to include transgender athletes. So then schools have to deal with that or face discrimination lawsuits or face funding cuts from the federal government and all of that. So we could pretend that there's no national implications to any of these elections, but that's a bit absurd. And you guys would be in favor of national education.
How many trans athletes are there in schools across this country?
I don't care. We're talking about the principle and whether or not the federal government can influence policy in local education. So like the amount doesn't matter. It's whether or not this is possible, and obviously it is.
I mean, I would say it does matter, but also I would say, sports necessarily is not what we're talking about. We're talking about being taught gender ideology in schools. I mean, how is that related to what's going on in the federal government?
But those issues are linked, though. If you are teaching that gender is solely based on self-identification, then obviously it follows that yes, someone who is born a biological male will be able to compete against biological females and compete for the same scholarships and same slots for admissions into certain teams or competitions. They're linked intrinsically.
And the federal government influences suspension policy in K through 12 schools because they say if you don't have proportionate to your population the students being suspended, that must be indicative of some kind of bigotry, aka racism, in most circumstances related to suspension. So the idea that they don't have the power to do this ignores the fact that they've been doing this. This was a policy that was created under the Obama administration, paused during the Trump administration, and then resumed under the Biden administration.
Just thinking about how sad that point about scholarships makes me, because people end up obsessing about, in this, I think, as Matt correctly raises, a very small number of cases, with regard to college athletic scholarships going to trans people, and not, I think, the larger issue there, which is how profoundly fucked up is it to have a society where anybody's ability to pursue higher education has to be linked to their athletic abilities, where we don't just provide that to everybody as a right, because every single human being should be able to pursue higher education if they're academically capable of it, if they want to do it, have the same opportunity to go to school, and I would also spend a few years learning and thinking and try to figure out what they would do that like upper income kids take for granted.
I would also love to see the numbers.
If we had that, it would just be like high school athletics suddenly becomes a much less fraught issue. It's kicking.
Well, I think it would still be a pretty fraught issue because it also ties into the locker room issue, right? So we're not just talking about the scholarships. There are other implications aside from that. But to your point about college and the cost, that's obviously another election issue. Biden, a lot of people were voting for him specifically because of student debt relief. He provided that to some extent. Some people are saying it's not enough. Do you guys think that some progressives out there might feel cheated, that it's not more? They might be hopeful that maybe it'll be more next time. Do you think that was a winning move for Democrats?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, should they give more? Absolutely.
What are the House
10 to 20K is more than a Republican would have given them.
No, it's more than a Republican would have given them. It's a good thing. I mean, I always find it a little bit funny when people talk about it as if it was like slightly illegitimate and I'm not saying you were doing this, but like that it's like slightly illegitimate that Biden is doing something because he knows it's going to be popular and then people vote for him, which is politics, how politics is supposed to work in a democracy. That politicians do things that make people's lives better and build up a base of popular support. I think that's all good. But yeah, absolutely. I think it should be. I think it should be more. I think it should be 100 100%. I don't think that people, I think if we charge tuition to go to public high school and people were being shaken down decades after the fact to pay off their high school loans, I would want that to be entirely forgiven, and I would say the same thing. The same thing in this case. And by the way, on the locker room issue, I think that the idea that this is a insoluble problem, I think is probably not accurate. Even in particular counties that like where I know this has been a big, like what the abstract hypothetical policy about it has been a big issue. I think the vast majority of trans kids want to be given an opportunity to change separately and in private accommodation. If you want to say we should have some policy to guarantee that nobody's uncomfortable around anybody else, the locker room, whatever, I think there's room to talk about that. But I also think that like we are talking about a really small number of people, and it always seems like a weird and cruel thing to focus on.
Right.
Yeah, I've since the midterm elections are underway, I'm told.
Fair enough. We should talk about those too.
Hey, this is all under the idea, as Lauren brought up. Like she framed it as this is an issue that voters are going to the polls thinking about these culture.
Well, I was just going to
issues.
On that note, I was just going to relay that I've been to a bunch of Republican and Democratic, but in terms of the Republican events in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York for the past 2 weeks or so. And I've heard the trans issue or, gender identity teaching in schools, that whole range of complaints. I've heard it voiced a bit here and there. And I've also listened to a tedious amount of congressional debates, in other parts of the country. You hear it come up every now and then as kind of the stock culture war item that kind of exists in every election cycle. But I am struck in terms of what I personally observed, including at an event recently here in northeastern Pennsylvania. This guy, Jim Bognet, whose event I'm at right now, he was just talking to a bunch of just random people who were at this little rally thing at a restaurant, and he was taking questions. And if this is like a generic pundit insight, so be it. But it was just bread and butter issue after bread and butter issue after bread and butter issue, inflation hammered over and over. Just pure, the basics of economics. Social Security was raised. I'm talking about what Republicans raised to him, the candidate. I didn't hear any of this stuff. I seldom hear this stuff really come up. So I guess what I'm saying I'm struck by is that although I'm sure some Republicans in various parts of the country view emphasizing the gender issue as a salient kind of culture war cudgel, a lot of what I've been seeing on the ground, at least in the Northeast here, it really is just pretty much relentless focus on pretty much the issue you would expect, which is that, people can't afford groceries and gas anymore.
Well, obviously the economy is a dominating issue. Famous line, Bill Clinton, is the economy stupid? Everybody understands that to a certain extent. However, there are issues that take over certain elections that happen. So the education issue was big in Virginia for Youngkin. In New York, the campaign has been run pretty much on crime, and Kathy Hochul has been running on the ghost of Trump, that apparently he's hiding under your bed and he's going to come and get you. So, if you spend any time in New York, the number one issue has been crime. And that is supported by the polling, and the only other time it's been supplanted is the economy.
Well, I haven't been following the Zeldin issue. How's he doing?
Oh, Zeldin's losing.
Close.
He's losing.
He's
not gonna win.
But it's a lot of New York City, and he's not losing as bad as he should be for Hochul to win.
So Sean is still hopeful.
Yeah, that's why I'm here. I would be hiding if he was losing completely.
Did you call it for him or something? Is that why?
He bet money.
You're gonna lose money.
That's fine. Wouldn't have betted if I wasn't ready to lose it.
All right, that's true. That's how you should you should throw down money on in gambling, on the stock market, in crypto. Only put money in you can afford to lose. Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm New York City born and raised. Lived here my whole life. New Yorkers really, I mean, sure, has there been some extra worry about crime in recent years or two? Sure, but that's mostly because the media has basically taken that whole narrative that New York is some bastion of crime, when the data shows that New York City is still, I believe, the safest big city in the entire country.
Yeah, but to be fair, people aren't comparing New York to other big cities. They're comparing New York now to New York a year ago, New York a couple of years ago. So even if the uptick,
New York, the trend is about the same. Honestly, anything else is perception. You can look at the data.
True. You have a
it is. I could.
You
I
have,
could
you
look
have
it
a
up.
47% increase in homicide from 2019 to 2020, and you're like, oh, it's no big deal because it's not as bad as the 1990s. It's absurd. Like, we are seeing spikes in homicides.
A 40% increase in homicide.
We had a spike we had a near doubling in shootings in 2020 in New York City. Like, it's not what you call it. Yeah, and I'm talking about New York City was around 300 murders in 2019, and it went to around 460 something in 2020. So that's about a 47%, I think, is the right number. Like, that's a huge jump. It's one of the biggest jumps in the history of New York City. And as somebody who also lives in New York City, I can tell you people are concerned about crime, and you can see the decay in the city. You can see that the fact that a lot of the quality of life enforcement has gone down.
Give me an example of that, though. Are you talking about you see homeless people in the streets?
Yes, there's tons of homeless people all over New York City.
I mean, who do you? Yeah, because we have failed here to take care of them correctly. Honestly, to actually provide services for the homeless.
Was Michael Bloomberg providing more services for the homeless?
I don't know. Perhaps people had a hard time during the pandemic and lost their jobs and never recovered. I don't know. I don't know if there's actually
the homeless being more around.
I have to look at the stat. I have to look at the data here. Honestly,
was that because of the pandemic as well, or is that due to the fact that they don't enforce the laws and the quality of life stuff that they used to enforce against?
Well, you can't enforce people out of homelessness. You have to actually deal with the homeless problem. Just saying you're not allowed to be here isn't going to solve homelessness, and then isn't going to solve the problem.
New York has the capacity for shelters for homeless people, and under Bloomberg and under Giuliani, the strategy was to enforce laws to keep them out of public places so that they would go to those shelters. So when you don't enforce that, they end up on the streets, and you see the negative signs of that. The quality of life issues in New York City.
Wait, we should force people to go into homeless shelters? That doesn't sound.
First of all, you don't have to force them to go into shelters. You get them off of the streets, and then they will go to the shelters. Like, you don't have to.
Where do you take them? What do you mean by get them off the streets? Are you suggesting
you enforce laws against
people?
panhandling? If you see them on the highway trying to sell like oranges or whatever, you don't.
But you're talking about homeless people in Manhattan. You just mentioned how you could just look around and you see homeless people littering
they're
on
they're all over Times Square.
So what do you want to do about it? You're going to arrest them?
Yeah, arrest them for loitering and any.
Oh, okay.
100%.
Oh, okay. Just mass arrests of homeless people. Okay.
Yeah,
doesn't seem like a way to fix them. What do you do with them? What do you do with them when you have to release them? What happens then?
Again, either they go to the shelters or they don't go back out in public and do the same thing.
Where are they going to go? Where are they going to go?
The shelters.
Did I not just say the shelters?
We have to force. But how do you convince someone who we give free will to, who we're not living in an authoritarian society? Remember, COVID mandates bad. How do we force these homeless people into shelters? What do we do?
Did I not just say that?
He just mentioned you enforce loitering laws and things like that. There are far too many young women, specifically in New York, who report not feeling safe because so-and-so is camping out at their front door and maybe even harassing them. And you can say, well,
harassment's different than just homeless people hanging out outside.
Okay, but these issues are intertwined, right? And
no, I don't think so. Those two are intertwined.
Yeah, not to say that every homeless person is going to harass you, but if you have a situation where there's an increasing number of homeless people on the streets, well, even in residential areas,
do you think we should give homeless people? Do you think we should give homeless people homes? Like, we should actually provide them with apartments and things like that?
No, I don't think that's going to solve an issue.
Okay, so what do we do then? What do we do? You
I'm not
tell
saying
people they
forcing
can't loiter.
treatment.
Like
I'm
this,
not
do you not see the
forcing, like,
cycle here?
treatment
You're saying arrest them. You arrest them. You got to let them go, right? You're just putting them back in the same situation. Go to the homeless shelter or you get arrested. They don't want to go to the homeless shelter. You arrest them. You let them go. Where are they going to go? It just goes on and on and on in a circle. And guess what? You ain't going to make any money from them. They have no money to pay the tickets.
You act like this is like an abstract phenomenon. Like this wasn't something that was practiced under Rudy Giuliani and under Michael Bloomberg. I'm old enough to remember that time in New York. I've been here for a long time. And all of a sudden, you stop enforcing those quality of life crimes. And gee whiz, the homeless people come right back and start doing
because
the same
it
exact
didn't
thing
solve any
that they were
problems. Do you
doing in the
understand that?
80s.
You didn't see homeless people because they were in jail and they were swapping back
They
and
would go
forth
to
from
the
being on
shelter,
jail and in
or
the streets.
they would not be soliciting, or they would not be trying to sell stuff illegally on the street or panhandling.
You basically, like, you're not solving the issue that you're claiming is such a big deal.
The problem is the urban decay. So yes, I am solving.
What does that even mean? I don't care about the buzzword urban decay. What does this
The
mean?
problem is blight that attracts other.
What is
violent
blight?
crime.
What is blight? You think homeless people are the ones committing all the crimes? Because that's not the
I
case.
didn't say they're committing all the crimes.
They're the blight. That's what we're talking about right
Yes,
now. That's
if
what you just called them.
If you have an area that looks abandoned, that looks like nobody's taking care of it, that draws in crime. This is a basic tenet of broken windows policing.
There are homeless people in Times Square. You're saying that's probably the
Do you think
mecca
Times
of where
Square
you
is
could find
more
homeless
or
people.
Less dangerous now? Do you think that Times Square historically wasn't the red light district? What do you mean by that? There's homeless people. in
Times Square is probably the
Yes,
safest
Times Square
place
is
in the
more
world.
violent now than before.
From when before? How far before are you going?
I think where I live is a lot safer than Times Square.
Yeah. Same.
Where do you live?
I live in a nice suburb. That's where
Do you want to give the state at least?
Illinois.
I can't. I mean, I can't tell from
It's
that.
considered one of the safest places in the United States.
Well, New York City is considered one of the safest places in the United States.
No,
as well.
it's not.
You can say it's safer compared to other cities.
But not the safest place.
We'll have to look it up.
Okay, you're really gonna say a city is safer than like suburbs?
I mean, the idea.
Yeah, the suburbs are where there's more murders in like rural areas than there are in cities.
Yeah, so
okay, but rural areas is not necessarily the suburbs. These are like different places.
Well, of course, sure, it depends.
Okay,
I
but
guess,
let's
what
go
exactly
back to the
suburb-
election because I don't think you guys are talking about the election. This is an election stream. So we got Arizona numbers coming in. Katie Hobbs right now is 55%. Carrie Lake is at 45%. I haven't really been looking at New York because I was just walking my dog.
Apparently, Zeldin is down in key counties.
A lot.
Like
yeah,
Erie County.
Zeldin's not going to win. Anyone who thought he was
GOP
gonna
doing
win
well
was-
in school board races, though.
He's down. He's not down by that much, and he's not down by that much in Brooklyn. He's at 27%.
I love the
Brooklyn.
hopium, Sean. I love it.
It's not hopium. Like he only would have to win about 30% of New York City, which is not impossible at the rate that he's going.
We'll see.
Look,
Can I just real quickly say on the homelessness thing that they have there is yes, I agree. Just letting people sleep in the park is not a good long-term solution. But I think that like massive investment in mental health services, in addiction services, and in long-term housing are all things that actually could be very effective here. And I think that the left often messages badly about crime, but I also think it's worth pointing out that there's a fair amount of criminological research showing that higher wages, more jobs, giving people health care, all of these things actually do reduce the crime rate, and in a way that I think just kind of going for more aggressive policing is less of a viable long-term solution. But I've been wanting to say that for the last few minutes. I understand now we're talking about the actual election number. I'm perfectly happy to do that too.
Because when I popped in the stream, like not to talk yet, just want to see where the stream was, and everyone was just yelling. They're like, and I was like, okay, I'm not gonna come in right now.
It was actually probably the only. I've been on for about an hour and a half now, and that was probably the only part where it was like that. So you jumped in at a pretty
I was like, oh,
specific
boy.
time.
Everyone's like, rah, rah, rah. It's like, oh, everyone was going nuts. I'm like, and I would pop in interjectly, like, see, like, oh, because interesting things are happening in the election. I'm like, you guys are not talking about the election right now. Come on, it's not a debate.
No, we're
stream.
talking.
No, we
we're
were.
talking
We were
about
talking about.
election
We were talking about
issues.
how the
Specifically New York.
Right.
No,
we were
yeah.
talking about
how the
how crime
results
became
are coming
Herschel
in
Walker-
right now. You have
Herschel
that.
Walker
You have
took
that
the
debate
lead.
tomorrow.
In the election, Herschel Walker took the lead, and I guess Kemp is just crushing it.
Oh yeah.
Well, Kemp was
everyone-
going to win.
People
There-
like
anyone,
Kemp.
like, again,
I
a lot
don't
of these
think anybody
races.
ever doubted that one.
Yeah. A lot of the
you were
races that are
watching-
announced that the media is acting like, oh my God, look how Ron DeSantis just crushed Charlie Crist. Okay, where the hell have you been? Of course he was going to do that.
But
the
it's like
idea
even
that
if you were looking at like the panels in Georgia of like when they would talk to voters, it was even like traditionally Democrat voters being like, yeah, I just think Kemp has done a good job. He's been doing good. So it's like when you have like traditional Democrat voters in a state saying like, oh, I like my governor. That's kind of how governor races work out traditionally. Like if people
yeah,
like
they're-
like their
Regardless of
governor.
the actual results, I look forward to Stacey Abrams declaring herself governor.
I mean, there are states that get very weird when it comes to state elections. I mean, Vermont has a Republican governor. I mean,
yeah,
but they
Vermont
have,
and places
a-
like Maine are strange.
Well,
And then you have places like Illinois where it's
No,
like
your
you
governor
just have
is
Chicago
more-
deciding the whole
Vermont
election.
historically is actually a pretty conservative state. People whose only data points about it are Bernie Sanders and Ben and Jerry's, sort of assume that it's this like hippie, oasis.
But that's the same thing with Illinois. Like everyone thinks, oh, because Chicago's like a representative of like the average Illinoisan. And it's like Illinois people hate people in Chicago. Like you go 20 minutes outside of the city, you literally just leave the city center to like what you would call like a suburb of Chicago. It's like 50-50 at that point of like Republicans, and they're like very staunch Republicans, traditionally Republican. Like our last governor was a Republican.
how you feeling about Pritzker
centrist.
crushing it?
Well, Pritzker, it's like he just has so much money. So, and it's just
he's
is he crushing it though? Because I don't
No,
know.
he
It's
is,
gonna
yeah,
be.
actually.
I know,
Yeah.
but we don't have. It's.
I mean,
still
we're looking at
early
a
votes.
potential Democratic presidential candidate right there, honestly, in the future.
Chatty,
Yeah.
Jelly Belly. He's
Pritzker,
done awful
yeah.
in the state. People
love him in the state. What are you talking about? I mean, look
Are
how
you
he just
from
destroyed. He
Illinois?
just
Hours and
destroyed.
hours
But
ago.
that-
like,
no,
This was like the
but-
first governor race called.
No, but that doesn't matter. Just because Chicago votes one way doesn't mean the whole state likes him. Like are you from Illinois?
I'm not from Illinois. No.
You talk to people in Chicago, people don't like him. They vote because he has a D next to his name. Anyone who would go with a D next to their name right now would be winning. People
mean,
don't
yeah.
like Pritzker. Like
you should
to see how he
talk to
speaks.
people left of
I
center.
live
People
here.
like Pritzker.
I
All right,
live
no, but
here
that's
in a
obviously, yeah.
Democrat state, and I
Right.
talk to people around me. I have a good understanding. People do
Sure.
not
I mean, I'm
like
sure, but you have to
Pritzker.
understand every single one of us live in a little bubble. I mean, it's just the facts of the matter. Like you surround yourself with like-minded people or people in your
No,
community.
I
who-
actually don't. I just talk to people like in my everyday life because when I go
Okay.
out, I like to talk to people. And
Okay.
like when I have people come over to my house, like to do work, I talk to working class people doing stuff. So yeah, I talk to like
okay.
people don't like Pritzker. They're gonna vote for a Democrat because they didn't like Bailey. Just because you like the Republican, people don't like him because you do know that Pritzker put over $30 million of his own money into the Republican
Right.
primary to get one guy elected that was least likely to win. Doesn't mean
Right. There are a
people
lot
like
of rich people in
Pritzker.
politics, right?
Well, Pritzker is a billionaire, if you know
Yeah.
the Pritzker family. But
Right.
when he's deciding the Republican primary, he's trying to find the person he could most likely beat.
Yeah.
It's not going to be like, oh, people are voting for Pritzker because they like Pritzker. They're saying they're voting for Pritzker either because they hate Bailey or because they're a staunch Democrat.
I don't know about that. Well, I mean, I'm sure there are people.
I know
obviously.
Illinois. Like I know
All
the
right,
Illinois
all right,
politics, I
all
think,
right,
better
yeah,
than you.
sure.
Is Dr. Oz about to blow this thing?
Oh, I haven't
mean,
even
that
been
was
looking at that one. What's
horrible.
happening?
They
I
should
mean,
have.
Again, this is a race that should have been, again, like outside of like Republican bubbles where they tried to smear Fetterman as being like somehow like his brain was mush or something just because
brain is
he had
mush.
trouble
Mere
speaking.
Fetterman by playing
This was
videos.
never-
No, but the thing is,
This
thing
was
is, like,
never
it's
going to
not-
be a. This was never going to be a competitive
But that
race.
is absolutely.
This was
Well,
gonna be a-
it is
this
it
was-
is actually a competitive race.
This is
but-
definitely a competitive race. If I can't remember the other guy in the Republican primary, what was his name? He was from Pennsylvania. If they had someone from Pennsylvania, that was people's biggest issue with Oz was that he wasn't from Pennsylvania. If you watch the voter panels, people did not like that he wasn't from there.
He wasn't from Pennsylvania. He was also a dual citizen. He was also running as a Republican, but he became a Republican like yesterday. And
No, but
like,
people really care that he
It's
wasn't.
because
from
He just was a
joke.
bad-
It's 'cause he's a joke TV candidate, but
Yeah.
you know,
He's a bad candidate, and Trump gave him his
you guys
endorsement
elected a
because Trump is
president that was a joke TV candidate.
well, Trump gave
I mean,
Oz
you want
the
a
endorsement
primary
because
with the most name recognition, which is what you need in a primary.
yeah.
Right.
So that was
But that race is definitely tightening right now. It's only 2.4% difference.
I'm pretty much from. I'm looking at some analysts here who basically Fetterman's outrunning Biden in basically everywhere in Pennsylvania.
Really? Because
Yes.
there's only like a handful of blue places. When I look at the map, it's primarily red.
I mean, again, land doesn't vote. It's the
margin.
cities are going to be smaller, and that's where most of the people are.
It's also the margins. If it's red, but if it's red by a lower margin, yeah.
It's. I mean, if Oz somehow squeaks out a victory, I would be surprised.
I mean, he's much closer than the gubernatorial race.
Oh yeah, well that's because again another case where the Republican Party.
I mean, there's still time.
You mean
the worst
Trump?
candidate.
Trump picked the worst
The Republican
candidate 'cause Trump
Party.
had a
The
big,
Republican. Yeah, Trump is the Republican Party now. I mean, I know some of you might not like it, but that's you got to lie in the bed you
it's
made,
not
right?
necessarily the reality.
I will make this prediction right now that if Trump runs and Ron DeSantis wins, Trump will. If Trump and Ron DeSantis both run in 2024 in the primaries, Trump's going to win easily.
Yeah, not easily.
Okay. Congratulations.
I think pretty easily.
mean,
I think maybe there'll be a few moments like there were in
in
2016 where like Cruz won one or two or whatever, and like there was some up, but overall Trump's just gonna completely, run wild on the competition.
I'm just hoping for the two of them to spend a year attacking each other. I think I worry that DeSanctimonious might not have the stomach for it. But they have but I would really, really, really like to see a long hitter. Trump versus DeSantis primary because it'd be very funny.
If Ron DeSantis was smart, if Trump won, if Trump decides to run in 2024, he would decide to hold on another 4 years to reach his presidential ambitions. Because if he runs against Trump, he is basically going to destroy any future credibility if Trump runs wild on him.
I don't think DeSantis would run against Trump. I think DeSantis is actually a smart politician, and I don't think he would do that.
But
I think if he is smart, he would do that.
It sucks for
Did
him.
you guys listen to his
I
speech
actually
tonight?
agree with Lauren about that. Unfortunately, I don't think that he would.
Did you guys listen to Ron DeSantis' speech tonight?
No, it was right here.
No. Oh, that was like 2 hours ago.
Yeah,
but
he should.
He said the whole time, "I did this. I got us here. So he kind of was taking aim at Trump. It really did feel like, because Trump has been trying to argue the last few days, like, I made Ron DeSantis, but yeah, you got him over the line last election, but you did not give him those 18% this election. So
no, that was 100% Ron DeSantis.
Ron DeSantis in his speech was saying, I did this, I did this, time and time again. That was very crystal clear, the message he was sending.
But by the way,
it sucks to be. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Sean. Oh, I was just going to say, going back to Illinois politics, it looks like the workers' rights amendment is so far. I'm trying to see what the timestamp is on this. This is just a few minutes ago. Is looking like it's passing by like 63.3%. So I don't know if that's like some sort of illusion that, like, again, you know more about Illinois than I do. Maybe like,
I didn't say that wasn't going to pass. I knew that was going to pass.
Okay. All right.
I never said that's not going to pass.
I don't think I said
that's an obvious thing. It was the way.
I don't think I said that you said it wasn't.
You said there's this illusion that you know more. No.
You know more about Illinois politics than he does. So is that representative of how the rest of the election is going to go?
Exactly. That's what I was saying.
It's a little different because that was kind of like, you have to think about like the unions in Illinois. So like obviously unions are going to like prop that up. If the ads I was seeing, there was a lot less money trying to attack that, because it's harder to attack something that's like seems so basic, because what that workers' right amendment will do is increase the property tax in Illinois. It's like literally built into it. So that message wasn't really understood, because like it's hard to put 2 and 2 together, those two things, like, oh, workers' rights, how will that impact my property tax? And the Illinois Policy Institute was trying to make that argument, but like they're so small, it's like, how do you have the money to push that message when they were putting money towards, there's some really competitive races in Illinois that money was going to towards instead, like, there's some suburbs of Chicago races that are super competitive. I'd have to look. They're very close, like 1 point between them. But yeah, the workers' right thing, that's just like hard to argue against, because it just, to most voters, seems like, oh yeah, like, yeah,
But
everyone
I
should have the
actually
right to
think-
unionize.
Yeah, and I actually think the Democrats have in a lot of ways lost touch with especially working class whites. But I think when it comes to unions, if I were a Democrat, I would absolutely be hammering that. And I think that is a winning issue for them. I want to ask you guys about abortion, though, because that's something we talked earlier on in the panel, but not with these specific guests. I think it's like something 20-some% of voters right now are saying that that's their number one issue.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah, but and it's kind of a big deal on both sides, because you also have a lot of galvanized pro-life people who are like, yes, now we can ban it at the state level. Do you think that ultimately Roe being overturned is going to hurt?
Every one of those ballot measures that have attempted to do that in even red states has failed at this point.
Yeah, but Kansas, that lost by high double digits, and that's in a state that
right. So it's not galvanizing voters on the right. I mean, maybe it is, but there's not that many voters to galvanize on this issue. I mean, this is an issue where there could have been a red wave tonight, maybe, but there's not because of this. I'm going to say this is probably the main reason why there's not some huge red wave.
Yeah.
No, I think it's also people aren't really feeling the effects of inflation and these type of things yet, and they're not putting 2 and 2 together. Can I make a point before you interject? But no, like a lot of people aren't feeling the effects of crime and inflation. Like in Chicago, like I had a friend, he got shot, and like still all my friends in my friend group, like he got shot just walking down the street in Wicker Park, a really nice like area of Chicago, and all my friends are still like, don't think crime's a problem, but like he was randomly shot by a group of guys in a car,
right?
Like, you're at fucking random. Like people aren't getting it. Like my girlfriend, she got mugged at a train station. My friends still don't think crime's a problem, and it's happening within our friend group, and they're still just like in la-di-da-da. So it's,
I mean, do you think they're in la-di-da-da, or if they're more based in reality than I mean,
well,
these random acts.
Do you think in Chicago this is a random
nobody
act
should be shot?
Wait, so you're saying these people were targeted?
Oh, I thought you meant like it's
no,
like
random acts of
common.
violence
Random
happen
can
all
also
over the
just be
country and in
not
big cities and rural.
Chicago, it's
not in those same levels.
different.
And like, here's the thing: like coming from Hong Kong and Canada, I feel like a lot of Americans are downplaying crime as just something that happens in cities when that's absolutely not the case.
No, it's not. I grew up. I went to a Chicago public school. I grew up. From the area that this has been happening. I've known this area for over 25 years of my life. This crime has never happened like it is in that area. And that area had, we had, what is it called? Like, what's it? Halfway houses. We've always had like low income housing in this area. And now the crime's like rampant. It's different when you walk on the street.
Just an aside from my producer, he's saying, dang, GOP should have waited till 2023 for the Roe decision. It's burning them in the suburbs.
Yeah, I was gonna say we drifted pretty far, because like a few minutes ago, Matt said that there might have been a red wave if not for the Dobbs decision, and then I kind of heard this no, and then there's a bunch of stuff about crime and inflation. So it's like, but do people actually think that's not true? I mean, like that it was really.
I think for some voters,
I think absolutely, especially okay. So what we have going on is that in the United States, even, you had the proposal to ban abortion after 15 weeks. That was really hammered on as this far right extremist policy. If we look at what's going over in Europe, we find that that's actually very, very common, even in these places where no one would say they're akin to The Handmaid's Tale or anything like that. But still, because of the way that this was done, absolutely, there are far too many people, especially my age and Marie's age, who are of the belief that the GOP wants to ban the treatment of miscarriages, who wants to ban the treatment of ectopic pregnancies, which is basically a death sentence to women. So absolutely, I think Democrats played that very well.
Yeah, there was a good like information war about like, kind of like a lot of people, like the things I was seeing like in my friend group was just people being like, there's no place in the world where this is happening. It's like, God, you really don't like understand the world at this point. Like
you absolutely don't.
Abortion rights are like the greatest here than like most places. Like in like Germany, you have to ask, but even like in Germany, it is not allowed. You have to ask for approval by like this board to have an abortion. That's like how it is in Germany.
I just think it's so interesting how, we all we heard going into this election that, Republicans were saying, voters care about crime and inflation. That's the whole thing they care about.
Do you think
and
they don't?
now I'm here, but now I'm hearing from you that apparently voters just don't realize they should care about crime and inflation as much as they should.
I said, like,
I mean, there are some people that are in denial about crime.
Yeah.
But
Especially
is it in
cities
denial,
where
or
you
you
live.
the guys? You guys are doing the Principal Skinner meme where it's no, the children are wrong. Maybe you guys are the ones who are out of touch.
You keep saying isolated incident, but a 30% increase nationwide in homicide is.
I'm bringing up isolated incidents. Mary's talking about her friends who got mugged and shot.
I'm making an inference.
I think Ben is trying to leave.
I think this is a good place to tap out because we're cycling back to something I already said all the stuff I have to say about.
Right.
Thank you so much for joining
Thank
us.
you so much for inviting me. This is a lot of fun. Yeah, I don't know. Bernie 2020.
Where can people find you really quick?
Where can people find me? So I have a show on YouTube and goes out on podcast feeds called Give Them an Argument, and I'm in Jacobin and the Daily Beast all the time. You can see me there.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much.
I just think
Peace,
that's
Ben.
disingenuous to make the argument that I made like these random. I'm just explaining, I'm extrapolating my observations with a group of individuals that is sort of representative of people who live in that city and what they think, because it's not just me. It's like when I talk to other friend groups, they're noticing similar things in their friend groups. It's just making an observation of people who are, let me finish.
Okay.
People who are impacted by crime and how they actually understand what is happening around them. Even when it's happening to them, how are they understanding what's going on around them and like the greater amount where, yeah, you can make inferences of like people aren't really at this point. It doesn't mean that they're not voting that way. I'm not saying they might not be voting that way, but it doesn't mean other people aren't voting for these issues. Like obviously they are.
Right. I mean, obviously there are different voter blocks, right? I think it's safe to say that, especially if you're an older generation, if you have a family, inflation is going to be number one. If you're someone, again, like looking at peers and Marie's and I, like, age and gender demographic, there are probably a lot of urban women who are going through, like, who are living through an increase in crime and things like that, who are also affected by inflation, but they care more about something like abortion. Does that, like, we were talking before about how voters should or should not be prioritizing stuff, what makes sense to us. I mean, Ben was saying it doesn't make sense to prioritize school stuff over Social Security. Someone like me is going to be looking at like one of these women and saying, like, look, how many abortions are you going to have, to justify the idea that the crime is not more important than that. Like we can't really, there's not like a one size fits all for what they
and
care
it's going to
about.
be like women who have like a partner aren't going to really be caring about, like, if they're married, they're not going to care as much about abortion because like if they get pregnant, that's kind of like, but
and
like
again,
girls who are single will care a little more.
The Democrats are carrying the abortion issue. If you look at the polling by party, it may be 22% nationally, but it's 44% for the Democrats. So that's what's motivating them to come out to vote.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, that's not a winning issue for independents and for obviously
I would say for independents, maybe.
But the thing is, that may be enough of a draw for Democrats to actually show up at the polls. Like we were talking about how young voters don't show up. If you put abortion rights on the ballot, young voters will be more likely to show up. 100%.
I mean, something's going on that's got to make sense of this non-red wave we're seeing. I mean, there's supposed to be a slaughterhouse, and we're not seeing it at all.
I mentioned earlier that red wave always makes me think of periods. I shudder every time
Well, Joe Rogan brought up the the scene from The Shining where the elevator opens and the blood comes flying out of. I mean, we're not seeing anything like that. I mean, it's been quite amazing, actually, as someone who was expecting. I wasn't so doom and gloom like a lot of people were. I thought it was going to be better. Dems were going to do better than expected, but I also wasn't expecting
I
it to be.
didn't think there was going to be a red wave. I didn't really see it being in the stars. Like I just when you're inundated with the media telling you like, oh, economic stuff's fine, like things are fine, and then you have these Republican people being like, oh, this is what's happening, but you have like the media apparatus being like, oh no, we're not in a recession, we're changing like these definitions. So it is going to be confusing for people to understand where we are, and it's just we're not that deep. We're not like in Europe right now. Like if things were like they are in Europe here, I think we'd be seeing things differently. But at the same time, a lot of people are like, what can a politician really do except for cut me a check? And that like people are like, well, Democrats are more likely to cut me a check, even though understanding that cutting a check is not really going to help the situation, but it helps the individual person in a short period of time.
Sure. I mean, it's a smart move because, I mean, that's what politics is about. Politicians should be doing something for their constituency. I mean, for really all the citizens,
sometimes
right?
to do the betterment, not necessarily just like the expedient thing.
Wow.
It's a bit more. That's kind of why we are where we are.
I mean, I agree.
Right now, the Republicans are not projected to take the Senate, and but they are projected still to take the House. So it's going to be interesting how these races shake out.
So that means nothing will be done for the next 2 years.
Which is good. That's why that's why the stock market rallied today, because the stock market would rather politicians not do anything, because when they do something bad.
I mean,
they
okay.
can do stuff. It's not great.
So it is looking like Walker is in the lead. What do you guys think about that race specifically?
I think that's easily the closest race of the night, and it could go either. It honestly could go either way. It really depends where the votes are out.
Yeah, Walker just took lead.
Yeah, but I could see Warnock flipping it again. It depends where the votes are still needed, are still being counted. Like where the bulk of these votes come from.
He has to get a majority, not just a plurality. Otherwise, Georgia has
runoff,
a stupid runoff. So he's under 50%. So that's runoff
territory.
And the last time we had a runoff in Georgia, it went pretty good for the Dems.
But this time it's much shorter runoff, so that helps Republicans a little bit, especially if Republicans don't do as good like in the overall midterms as some were thinking. That is way more beneficial because people might want Democrats not to have like the balance of power, so they might want to just give it to the Republicans at that point. It might be a little bit of a propeller for them. People don't vote when they think they're gonna win.
I have another stream to go on. I've been here for 2 hours and it's been a lot of fun. Would be happy to do anything like this again. Mary, when you joined, I was happy to finally have someone on here to butt heads with because it was a little bit too friendly, actually, if you ask me.
And earlier, I heard you guys screaming at each other. So I don't know.
Actually, that was like the one moment. That was the one moment, and then you came on and we were going at it. So,
and it's funny because I was saying like, okay, we have a lot of people who are technically of the same, but like we need more people on the other side. We're agreeing too much, and then everyone like just started.
Right when I joined, though, it seemed like both Destiny and Ben Burgis jumped on. So it was like, whoa, this wasn't the stream I was expecting to join.
I know. I was like, let's get some neocons. Come on, someone who's like, yeah, war with Russia. Well, it didn't happen.
Yep.
Yeah, you guys are all like, no, give Russia everything.
So I'm going to say goodbye and would be happy to stream with you all again. People could check me out at youtube.com/Matt Binder. I know your listeners and viewers probably won't agree with me, but on my live stream, I take calls from people. I don't pre-screen them, literally just take them as they come in. You could watch, call in, and literally bring up anything, and we'll talk about whatever. And it's a lot more fun when people call in who don't agree with me. So I implore you to call in.
You're brave for doing that, not necessarily because of political disagreement, but just because it's the internet. And
they might say something wild.
And I love it. It's great.
Do you touch on the election security stuff? Because I know on YouTube that'll destroy you.
I mean, I don't like. I don't know if I cover it, but I'm not someone who believes like there's some like there's.
No,
some
I know. I just know with
propaganda.
YouTube, like if you even talk about it, don't they like ban you?
Yeah, if your caller throws out some wild stuff, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Don't you?
As long as
getting in trouble.
As long as I correct the record, it's been fine. As long as you add information that's based in, reality or factual, you could have these discussions as long as you make those points clear.
Algorithms, though, they really just get you sometimes.
Yeah, I've been lucky, I guess maybe.
Yeah.
But we'll see. All right.
Thanks so much.
Have a great night, everybody.
Peace out. Have fun.
Bye. All right, we're going to be probably wrapping up the stream pretty soon as well. Is there one final topic you guys want to touch on before?
Well, I was just going to say, like, I have like New York up on my screen and it is starting to tighten. It's still like big, but within like the last 2 minutes, like Zeldin has gone up a few points, like quite a few, like 3 or 4 or 5.
If you would have told me earlier that he was going to get 30%, close to 30% of the Brooklyn vote, I would have been like, he has a real chance. But it's not looking great. Although
sadness.
Yeah, I know, it's depressing.
Okay, Sean, you're from New York, and people who watch your channel, they know your political beliefs. Is there any is it possible that New York would get so bad that you would leave?
Yes, after my fiance graduates law school.
Okay.
When's that?
Like I could work from anywhere. So if like she were to like break up with me, which she shouldn't do that, then like I would go live in a state with almost like no state income tax. Probably Florida because I have family there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
like too many YouTubers live in Texas, and I don't want to live near too many of them.
I don't like Texas very much.
Me neither. I know that's a really bad thing to say as a conservative, but I don't it's like one overgrown strip mall. It's not my jam.
I think maybe if like you just had like a really big piece of property, but I don't know. It's a little dry. Maybe what's that area that's like by the beach in Houston? That area seems nice, but